Our panel is here to talk about how the work of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project contributes to the objectives of the Paris Agreement, including the development of mid-century strategies. The DDPP consists of independent research teams from the 16 highest GHG-emitting countries, representing 3/4 of global CO2 emissions. It was organized in 2013 by Jeff Sachs and Laurence Toubiana, and the work of the country teams has been coordinated by the SDSN and IDRI. 5 of the research teams are represented on this panel. From China, Dr. Liu Qiang of the National Climate Strategy Center. For Russia, Dr. George Safonov of the Higher School of Economics. From Mexico, Dr. Daniel Buira of Tempus Analitica. And for Canada, Dr. Chris Bataille of IDRI. I lead the US team, and I am also DDPP Director for the SDSN. The question the teams addressed is, what will it take to deeply decarbonize each of our economies by mid-century, consisting with limiting global warming to 2 degrees C or less, while still meeting national priorities for social and economic development? Above all, deep decarbonization needs to start with a concrete understanding of how to transform the energy system in each country from high carbon to low carbon, while still providing the full suite of energy services our daily lives and economies depend on. The goals of deep decarbonization have to do with how many tons of CO2 are emitted to the atmosphere, but the task of transformation has less to do with counting tons and more to do with counting stuff, like power plants, buildings, and industrial boilers, and changing these physical infrastructure stocks into more efficient and low carbon stocks over time. Planning ahead is critical to this transformation because the infrastructure and equipment on both the supply and end-use sides of the energy system is long-lived compared to the time we have available to decarbonize. Power plants and buildings built today will still be in use in 2050. If investment decisions today do not take into account long-term infrastructure needs and its carbon consequences, these investments can become dead ends. Either investments will be stranded or emission targets won't be met. Developing long-term deep decarbonization pathways helps avoid the high carbon lock-in problem by showing the changes required sector by sector, year by year, for different technology options and transition paths. They allow us to analyze what different alternatives imply for cost and investment, what best fits national circumstances, and what the needs are for R&D and international cooperation. They allow us to anticipate future choices. I want to share 3 key findings of the DDPP. First, deep decarbonization is something we can actually achieve together with sustainable development. The DDPP teams developed their country pathways independently and bottom-up without a centrally imposed emissions budget. The aggregate results of these pathways were within the 2 degrees C window. Per capita emissions in most of the countries were below 2 tons of CO2 per person in 2050. For example, in the US, we developed 4 very different technology pathways that met an 80% below 1990 target in 2050 and reduced per capita CO2 emissions by a factor of 10, while maintaining forecast economic growth and levels of energy services. Achieving this requires a sustained transformation of our energy systems over several decades based on large-scale deployment of efficient and low-carbon technologies. It is technically feasible to do this without technological miracles, employing technologies that exist today, assuming improvement of performance and cost over time with innovation, increased manufacturing scale, and technological learning. Experience shows this process can be accelerated through targeted R&D and market transformation policies, as demonstrated by recent reductions in solar PV costs. The second key finding of the DDPP is that deep decarbonization has 3 technical requirements that hold true across all countries. sometimes referred to as the three pillars. The first pillar is much greater energy efficiency from residential buildings to industrial processes. The second pillar is nearly complete decarbonization of electricity generation. Across the 16 country studies, the average reduction in carbon intensity was 93%. The third pillar is widespread electrification of transportation and other end uses, because direct combustion of fossil fuels in these applications is not compatible with the emissions reductions required for 2 degrees C or less. Deep decarbonization requires all three of these pillars, not just one or two, because the full benefit of emissions reductions comes from the interactions between them. For example, the full benefit of electric vehicles comes from being highly efficient and powered by near zero carbon electricity. For most countries, this implies a coordination of planning and investment across sectors that is currently rare. For example, between the power sector and transportation. ICT, a topic later today, will also play a role in this. Although the three pillars are always required, there are many different technology pathways for implementing them. For example, in power generation, there are nuclear, carbon capture and storage, and renewable generation paths. In light-duty vehicles, there are battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and biofuel paths. It is not a matter of one size fits all. The third key finding is that deep decarbonization is within our reach economically. The low-carbon transition is characterized by large changes in the energy economy, but the net cost is relatively small. This is because a decarbonized economy spends much less on fossil fuels and much more on technology. It is an energy economy driven by fixed investments in clean technologies rather than the price of a barrel of oil. For example, for the US, we found that deep decarbonization would have a net cost for supplying and using energy equivalent to about 1% of GDP, not counting at all the economic benefit of avoided emissions and avoided climate change. What is needed to drive this change is redirection of investment flows to efficient and low-carbon infrastructure. Across the DDPP, we found the increased annual investment required was on the order of 1% of GDP, the aggregate GDP of the 16 countries. Development of large global markets in clean technology will lower costs tremendously due to manufacturing scale and technological learning. We found that for low-carbon power generation fuels and alternative vehicles across all 16 countries, cost would be reduced by about half in local, large global markets compared to each country taking a go-it-alone approach. Several developing country teams noted that such cost reductions would be pivotal in their country's ability to actually implement low-carbon pathways. Being able to share in the commercial opportunities of producing for such markets also is a strong positive incentive. Deep decarbonization pathways fill the gap between an emissions trajectory, which is essentially lines on a graph, and steel in the ground. They make clear what policy actually needs to accomplish, which is a critical step before designing the policy. They send the necessary signals to business and investors. They allow assessment of how an energy transformation can support economic development, public health, energy security, and other priorities. And finally, I've found that talking concretely about what deep decarbonization requires tends to make people more supportive of it because it seems more real to them. I want to turn to my colleagues now and ask them each to address two questions. How does your DDPP country study contribute to the development of your country's mid-century strategy and long-term policies? And what are the main benefits of international cooperation on deep decarbonization, including with neighboring countries, and how are they reflected in your DDPP work? We'll go in this order: Chris, Daniel, Qiang, and George. Thank you.
Okay, testing. Everybody hear me here? Okay. When we were organizing this panel, we knew we were going to be very time constrained, so one of the deals we had was that we'd be additive to each other. So I'm going to try not to repeat anything that Jim has said, and hopefully that we cascade down the line that way. But you do agree with it? Do I agree with it all? Yes, I do. Of course I do. Okay, so First of all, I'd like to reiterate that a good deep decarbonization pathway, and there is no single one for any one country. There are multiple options depending on what perspective you're coming from, is going to require a physical sector-by-sector map of how we accomplish the goal, what kind of capital we're going to require to do that, how we're going to have to retrain our labor force in order to participate in that, and finally, you're also going to need some sort of offered policy package. So how are you going to get around to this? Because the policy package is integral to the innovation. It helps drive it along the pathway. So I'm going to offer 4 criteria for these policy packages, and they're going to be different for every country. That's one of the key things here. They're going to be different by every culture, economic circumstance, and stage of development. The first of the criteria is you've got to cover all your emissions. You cannot, with the carbon budget constrictions we have, there can be no emitted emissions. 2, you need clear long-term signals for the schedule, for a sector-by-sector schedule for when they need to decarbonize. It's going to be harder and easier for different sectors. You need aggressive but realistic short-term policy in line with those long-term signals, and that policy helps drive innovation in the sector. It makes the whole thing cheaper in the long run. And then coming back to this, and this can't be reiterated enough, it's got to be sensitive to national circumstances, to your cultural circumstances, your economic circumstances, and your level of development. Now, I come from Canada. It's a rich country, highly developed. We've got our issues. First of all, we're a federation. Just as by example, we're a federation. Energy and electricity firmly belong to the provinces unless the stuff crosses a border or there's a pressing national issue. Now, some of our provinces have emissions 3 times. Their industrial structure means that they've got emissions 3 times the level of other regions, which means that we've got a strong equity issue at play along with a national interest. And if a policy package is going to survive our policy process, it has to address both of those. Now, and equity is going to show up in all sorts of forms and dimensions. And for us, it tends to be regional. The second thing is our other big cultural touchstone is competitiveness. We're a highly traded nation. Well over 80% of our GDP is traded. So if we start applying policy packages, what happens to our competitiveness? And what we have found is that we can go about $50 per ton ahead of the United States, our biggest trading partner, while we're doing this. Now, in terms of our effect of the DDPP on the Canadian climate policy debate, I'm just going to refer back to Dr. Stephen Lucas, who spoke earlier. Let's just say that we had an 80% target before. What we found with the DDPP, working with everything else, we had to hit minus 90. But it's doable, and it's quite doable, and it's quite affordable. We just need to put that policy in place. And we've had some effect on provincial policy packages in Alberta, Ontario, and there has been some input to the National Low Emissions Pathway. Now, in terms of international cooperation, I would say there's 3 levels to this. One that Jim's already spoken to. There's with every new solar panel that's built, with every new battery, with every new windmill, the costs are coming down for everybody else, and that applies equally here in North America. Where things get more complicated is with the soft and hard linkages of policy. We already link our transport regulations with the United States. Canada closely follows behind California every time they come up with new iterations. And hard policy linkages, Ontario and Quebec have directly linked themselves to California. We're already in emission. What we found is that if we can stay not siloed at the provincial level, if we come 5 years from now, we can have some sort of level of heavy emitter trading, we can cut the marginal carbon price by well over 1/3. And if we can link into the states, it could be even less than that. And finally, just to close off, there's hard plan linkages in terms of electricity transmission. Right now, our electricity grid is focused north-south, from BC down to California, Quebec to the northeast. Our thinking right now is how does Quebec support Ontario or BC support Alberta in bringing on more renewables? But should we be thinking in a North American context, thinking in a gross scale, using our hydropower system as a storage battery for renewables across North America? But that's a whole other level of trust and contracting in terms of trade discussion that we need to get into.
Thank you, Jim, for the questions, and thanks to the organizers for being here. It's an honor to take part. The first question was about how the DDPP work informs the low carbon strategies and the 2050 mid-century strategies. What we found in the Mexico work is that the DDPP analysis is very important in helping countries plan their long-term strategies. It's particularly important in emerging economies such as our own, because many people are already experiencing an acceleration in terms of their purchasing power. People have expectations to be able to change their lifestyles. And the default setting in which people want to carry out their aspirations is in the old model with the old technologies. And if we just do that, we will have business as usual and we will have serious lock-in, as has been described. So the first lesson that we learned from the DDPP analysis is that part of the pre-2020 ambition of emerging economies must be developing the long-term pathways. Otherwise, these 4 or 5 years where we are building out so quickly, where people are buying that first car, that first air conditioning unit, will really increase the fleet, and it's all new, so that's 20, 30-year lock-in, and that's bad news. And in that sense, the fact that the high-level champions will invite parties to bring these long-term strategies for the 2018 facilitative dialogue is very welcome. I think it reflects our political and diplomatic leaders listening to these technical messages, and I'm very happy that's happened. Now, the good thing is that the DDPP work doesn't only present the problem, it also presents the solution, what the solution might look like. As has been described, I'll try not to repeat too much, but if you can build a technology profile of what your country might look like in 35 years, and a sensible transition approach that doesn't have dramatic cuts, but it has reasonable, economically reasonable fleet transition, that can suggest a policy package that people can believe in. And this is a very important element of what DDPP can bring. How the analysis will feed the exact results of the mid-century strategy remains to be seen. I am looking forward to Mexico's strategy and the other two. But I'll try to focus on a case study because it really is technology-specific work. Mexico has air quality problems and a relatively dirty vehicle fleet. Some people discuss using natural gas vehicles. And the air quality perspective might suggest that is useful. A 2050 perspective that is cautious about lock-in suggests that that is not useful, and that that would actually build infrastructure that we would have to switch off early. So asking the same questions of the same data, but from a different perspective, is leading to different results. I'll focus very briefly on the international question, and I think Chris has laid out how international collaboration will help countries actually achieve these routes. So I'll focus on a much more immediate question, which is how do countries start developing these pathways? And in the Mexico case, the international collaboration was very important. If we had not received the invitation from the initiative that Jeff and Laurence kicked off and that people like Jim and Chris started to structure, I'm not sure that my co-author and I would have engaged on this journey. In so doing, we benefited from the tools, the calculator, the dashboard. That helped guide our discussions. And also there was a pretty dynamic peer review, informal, but not soft. And that also played a role. So for us, this dynamic was fundamental. And I think we're short of time, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to come to this very exciting side event because I joined the DDPP team from China for almost more than 2 years, so I learned a lot. So I think for the contribution of the DDPP to Chinese mid-century strategy, actually we initiate one low-carbon development strategy by 2050 program in China about 3 years before. So I think that DDPP project, we try to put a very strong link to that program, and actually DDPP project provide very strong support to that program. So in order to, I just want to specify 3 points regarding this contribution. One is what? I think DDPP provides a very strong signal and very strong information that what kind of highest emission reduction potential China can achieve by 2050. That would be a very good signal for all of us, not only for researchers, but also for the government official policymakers. For example, that in DDPP project, I think is one of very important results we got is that we can achieve that low carbon energy can become dominant energy by 2050 in China, because energy transformation in China is quite important for the low carbon development. So I think it would be a very big signal, and also that in power sector, like also the energy intensity in power generation in China can be reduced by more than 90% from 2010 to 2050. That would be also very good signal for power generation sector, which is a very key sector of the emission in China now. And second word, I think is how to achieve the DDPP. I think the DDPP project not only give the target, but also give that pathway in different sector, in power sector, in building sector, transportation, and also industry sector. So I think that would be very good basis for Chinese policymakers to think what kind of actions we need to address in next 35-year period. For example, I think that due to the changing of the economy of China, the urbanization process will become the main contributing process for the carbon emission increase in next 35 years. And also that for transportation sector, we need to consider how to control the carbon emission in transportation sector. So one of options is using the new energy car. So from DDPP project, we found that what kind of new energy car, electric car or hybrid car, or even the hydrogen car we can use in the future by 2050. So we have a lot of discussion on this issue that would contribute a lot for our pathway analysis. And third word, I think, is timing. Even DDPP given very long-term targets, long-term analysis. But one of key message we got is we have to do now, from currently, from the next 15 years, not only the 35 years. So I think it's very important for us to consider what kind of contributing factors can be done in next 35 years. Energy efficiency, which we have done lots in last 5 years, and what further emission reduction we can got from the energy efficiency improvement. And also what kind of policy condition, because as China now experience the economy transition period, that means we will focus more on the quality rather than just the growth rate. So I think that's very important for us to think about what kind of market-based mechanism, what kind of very good environmental policy we need for the next 15 years. So I will emphasize that. And regarding with the international cooperation, I think is one experience we got from the DDPP is to this comparison study would be very important through very broad international network. Like we compare many technology progress about that different sector, what kind of technological progress, what kind of technology breakthrough we can get in next 35 years. That would contribute a lot for our analysis, for our policy making policies. So I think that in the future, because we are helping Chinese government to starting our analysis on the mid-century strategies, low emission development strategy for China, and we think we will continue work with DDPP team and try to deepen the DDPP research, especially in 2 points. One, I think, is to check out what kind of very high technology breakthrough we can get in next 15 years. Another is we will continue exchange with policymakers in all the process of developing the mid-century strategy. That would be very important to translate our result to some real actions. Thank you.
Good morning. 3 years ago, we started our Deep Decarbonization Project in Russia. We considered Russian economy as a huge ship, very overloaded with oil, coal, gas, heavy industries, old infrastructure, plenty of different stuff on it, and probably going in a wrong direction. Absolutely inconsistent with climate goal that we now consider as a goal for us. And it was not easy to agree for ourselves that we should make this task that Professor Sachs told us to do, to find how the ship may look absolutely differently, beautifully, carbon-freely, and pleasantly by 2050. That was not so easy to imagine, and after some fight with Jeffrey Sachs and the others in our DDPP network, we decided to do this exercise. You can imagine how it is hard to do. You see, my colleagues already told you technical stories about their countries, like China. It is very hard to understand these details, but you see how hard it was for us to understand what to do with Russian economy. But we did this analysis. We applied a few different approaches, models. We found a few scenarios which would allow Russia to reduce carbon emissions by 87%. It is hard to imagine, but it is possible in modeling world. If we compare it with climate goal and add Russian forests that sequester some carbon, we probably can see this modeled Russian economy as carbon-free. I have only 3 minutes in big country to say about it. Okay, let me be fast. Okay. So what were the questions? I had to respond on two major topics. One, so what we're going to do with this analysis? How we can send signal to our captain on the ship? Both questions are relevant, you see. So what we did already, we have a very big process of energy strategy development. Now we have finally adopted Energy Strategy 2035. What is good in it? We have a carbon target in it. And it is not growing, it is stable, -30, which is, I think, not very bad. We have now a different perspective for analysis of industrial development plans, specifically about metal sector, metallurgical sector, cement, chemicals, coal, and others. We have very close look at sectoral and technological perspectives for development in Russia through this prism of DDPP. We support subnational initiatives which are very interesting. Some of them, for instance, carbon-free Eastern Siberia initiative by Vice Premier Minister Trutnev, which is very interesting because it's huge territory. We support regional decarbonization pathways development initiatives for Moscow city, for St. Petersburg, for Urals, Siberia, Forest of Russia. We support business initiatives which are very relevant to it. For instance, establishment of a business partnership, Russian business partnership for climate action, corporate policies and reporting systems, some attempts to introduce carbon pricing. All that is relevant, and we justify it through our analysis of decarbonization pathways. So what to say about international cooperation for 1 minute? I would say very quickly that for me, very important international cooperation would be to cooperate less with Russia on fossil fuels, because it's a really serious thing. If we speak about China, if we speak about Japan, they all want Russians to export oil, coal, and gas, which is undermining our efforts in terms of decarbonization. Even gas projects are not a medium-term solution if we consider it through prism of decarbonization. I want internationally that we have a process of decarbonization going hand in hand with two other processes: divestment from fossil fuels and carbon pricing. So I have more in my list. If you are interested, I can share. But overall, what I'm happy about with decarbonization project is that our ships of our countries go in more or less similar direction, not in different directions now. And we should support and care about this process. Thank you.